Cool. So one question up front. Who has heard about E.D.I before? Raise your hand. Oh, more than I thought. Cool. But anyways, for all the others, this is going to change today. E.D.I is quite old, but quite unknown as well. But let's start with me, because I'm the presenter. So first of all, my name is Gregor Jarisch. I'm developer lead from that open source project for roughly 10 years. So I started in 2006, quite a while ago. I'm also chatbot lead at Differ, which is a Norwegian edtech company. I'm going to talk about it a little bit later. And in case you would like to look up either me or any of my projects, there you have it. So let's start with what is E.D.I. So E.D.I is an open source chatbot platform. Bless you. It's developed in Java. It's a Docker container, so it's a full-fledged application that can be deployed on enterprise applications such as Kubernetes or any other Docker supportive systems. It is made to run multiple chatbots with shared knowledge, so you could imagine it just as regular software development where you have components that you can share amongst different projects. The same idea, you have shared knowledge that you can use in multiple chatbots in order not to reinvent the wheel, but once you have established a certain knowledge package, certain knowledge domain within a chatbot, you can reuse it in other chatbots. So if you're thinking about developing multiple chatbots, that's really the way to go. It already has a couple, it's plugin oriented, it has a couple of plugins already available, the most important one from natural language processing unit, behavior rules, you have an API connector, which I'm going to show you in a bit, basically the possibility to fetch data from an API and use it without programming, and there is a pretty interesting templating framework that allows you to do a lot of things with the data you have fetched. Extension-oriented plugin system means if whatever E.D.I doesn't, whatever E.D.I provides is not enough for you, you can easily just spin up IDE and develop plugins yourself. A little bit about the project itself. It grew over the years to a repository of 21,000 lines of code, has been engineered over 8 years. I said before, since 2006, that's a bit more than 8 years because I stopped in between. For some years, went to media and went back eventually. And we crashed so often against the wall with our development approaches that we just say, okay, we had to redevelop the whole thing because we figured out, okay, this is not the way to develop chatbots. So apparently I could say I have a good idea about how to develop a good chatbot, but I have many, many more ideas on how it doesn't work. So the philosophy of E.D.I, or in general the applications we develop, it should be flexible. Because when you use it, I mean, of course, if you start from scratch with any type of development, it's always easy to use something new. But usually you already have infrastructure, usually you already have your backend system, you're working in a company, and then you don't need an application that dreams of the new land where you can just develop what you want, but you really have the infrastructure, and whatever new application you take into should be able to adapt. Then, of course, reusability, as I already said, you don't want to always reinvent things from scratch. And, of course, nowadays, performance and efficiency is very important, especially when it comes to chatbots, when you have thousands, maybe millions of users interacting with the chatbot. The last thing you want to worry about is actually performance. OK, enough about the high-level talk. Let's dig into details. So right now, we're going to go into a very, very simple example. That's not building a chatbot. That's building a specific chatbot feature. That could not be considered a full chatbot because chatbot would need personality. A chatbot would need multiple features. You need to roll it out on multiple messenger channels. So we're not going to do any of these because of lack of time, but just one very simple features to get the idea on how this works. So I chose to develop a weather feature. So imagine somebody would ask, okay, what's the weather? And we're going to try to figure that out and by calling an open weather API and use that data in our answers in order to give the user this feedback. So imagine user would say, what's the weather? Then appropriate answer from the bot would be which city, because somehow, I mean, it could be anywhere, so we need at least this one specific data in order to give him the weather of that specific city. Let's say user would say Vienna, and then the chatbot would answer something like this. I made it up, but I guess it's probably cloudy and the temperature seems to be correct as well. So how would the interaction flow look like? So of course you have the user interacting with the computer, and whenever you have an input, the input gets first to the parser. Parser is really basically a simplification of the sentence. So most of the parsers that work really extract only the most necessary information out of the user input, and everything that doesn't suit the further process will be just thrown away. So in particular, let's say what's the weather is the input. Then the only thing that's interesting here is that the user wants to trigger the functionality, give me the current weather. Nothing else from the sentence, whether it's be what is all the articles. In some use cases, they are relevant. If they're relevant, then you would use them. But usually when you build chatbots, you try to avoid any complexity, and that's why you throw away everything you don't need. So the behavior rules then would check only for this meaning. We call this meaning expressions, and would trigger actions based on the meaning. We're going to look at concrete JSON code examples in a bit, just to give you a quick overview. This behavior would trigger these two actions. The one would be fetch weather, which is actually for the API connector, so in order to know, okay, now I have to fetch the weather. And current weather is something the output going to listen to in order to actually produce the output sentence. And in the end, we expect the answer like this. So let's look at code. It's just JSON structures. You don't actually have to code, like really develop anything. So if you understand how JSON structure look like, and if you understand how RESTful APIs work, you have everything you need in order to use E.D.D.I. So let's start with the first. That's a dictionary. We have two possibilities, either words itself or phrases. The difference, a phrase is more than one word in a certain order. So the most prominent example I love to give is day after tomorrow. It's a phrase that only makes sense in that particular order. If you would swap the words or would leave one away or give one in addition, the meaning would change. So that's a phrase, and otherwise you would go with words. So basically word and expression is what the parser does in translating. When it figures out, okay, there's a word or a phrase, it translates it into these expressions. So these expressions, trigger current event, is what we're going to look for in the next one too. So we're going to head over to behaviors. So keep trigger current weather in mind. And that's basically it. We have here rules, again, JSON structures. They are grouped. So we have behavior groups, and within the groups, there are rules. And within each rules, there are different conditions available. We only take one specific one, which is the input matcher that only looks for what the user have said. Not particular the input itself, but the meaning that we have extracted from the parser. And then there's another one that's also important, which is, in that case, ask for city. This is an action. So whenever a rule applies, all the conditions are true, then it triggers an action, and other modules that follow would listen to certain actions and then execute based on them. This is the first part. This would be the asking for the city. Remember, we said what's the weather, and then the bot would ask for which city. So this would be the rule that would execute that. We need a second rule as well, such as when the user actually set the city itself, that we actually able to do that. Once again, we look for the input he set, but this time we said, was it before, not in the current conversation step, but was it in conversation step before? And once again, we have the action that should be triggered when this rule applies. So remember the fetch current weather action. Imagine we are at the second step, so the user has already said he would like to have it for Vienna. So now the API connector comes into play. So API connector is a pretty powerful tool that is pretty easy to configure. You just define target servers, and then you have HTTP calls where you basically define REST requests as you would know it from any other REST client available. There is two specific things that come into play here. The one is you actually can use templating. So basically, in that case, we have a query that we need to fill with the actual user input that we had before, and this is very useful with this. Time leaf is a very powerful templating engine. So just asking around who has heard or maybe using Timeleaf before. Okay, a few. So it's been a templating engine that is around for, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, I would say, has been thoroughly developed and is very powerful. So you can iterate things, you can do all kinds of stuff in that very example. It's just very simply used. And then something else we're going to look at is the response object name. And in that case, we say it's a current weather. So API connector is very powerful, but it has one important limitation. It only works if the answer from the REST API you are using is a JSON. So if that's the case, which is most of the time the case in these days, we can use this response and then use it in our templating engine further. So in that case, we say save response true, and the line below, response object name, in that case, current weather, will be sort of the variable in which this response will be saved. And this is the output templing. Again, it listened to the action the behavior rules has triggered before. So as you can see, they are loosely coupled and basically listen to the terms we have defined before. And here we go again with the templating engine. In that case, I said before, the current weather is the place where our response object from the weather API is stored. And the rest, in that case, weather, array 0, and description, or main temperature, is just the content of the JSON that is returned. So that could be any other way. It could be highly complex. It could be nested. It doesn't matter. You can just address it and use the values for it and construct simple as well as quite powerful templates. Could be also used for HTML templates if you want to make something more fancy. So just to sum it up, basically this is what we were looking for. If you are eager to try it out yourself, there is documentation that follows step by step on this very example I just gave. It's the bit.ly E.D.I weather example. I'm going to upload it on SlideShare afterwards, so if in case you're interested, you could try it out. So now, I'm pretty good in the time, amazing. So now enterprise use case, there is Differ. It's a Norwegian company, as I said before. They develop EdTech technology. They have multiple of thousands of users using their chat application. And within the chat application, there are chatbots, and these chatbots are meant to trigger behavior. And the reason I mention it here, because the chatbots, the technology behind it is E.D.I. So the use cases Differ uses is basically automating best practice pedagogy with chatbots. So what does that mean? Well, sometimes you have to trigger behavior or trigger conversations in order for engagement to raise. So in that very example, figuring out the study group, when you first come to university, you've never been before, you're a freshman, then chances are high that you don't know anyone. And maybe chances are high you're afraid coming there, maybe you're not that outgoing yet. So this makes you feel a bit uncomfortable. So we say, okay, let the chatbot ask if they want to get introduced to others they might going to study with. And that's basically the idea. You have first a conversation with the users, and then you trigger group conversations, say, hey, guys, you have shared interests. You will have the same major or maybe some hobbies that you guys share. So how about you're going to introduce each other? And by the bot be able to trigger this, we have one possibility is very scalable. So it's not any of us that have to do it, but we can do it for thousands, if not millions of classes out there. But on the other hand, for the students, it's very nice because they get to know their real student peers. And therefore, when they first come to university, they are not alone, but they already know people they can talk to. Another example on how Differ uses E.D.I as a chatbot technology is just in general, I mean, any one of you guys, including me, and I'm just assuming, I don't even want to ask, but everyone who studied, may that be a high school, university, whatever, was at one time or more late with their assignments, or not even did it. So the idea basically is that you nudge students to complete their assignments. And that could be in advance, so we have algorithms that look, okay, what would be the best time to actually respond and to remind the students. But not just, hey, you have an assignment and therefore the stress level should raise up, but actually asking, hey, there's assignment coming up, the due date is in 3 days, do you need help? And if that's the case, then we also form study groups and try to group people that are going to help each other and therefore eventually succeed in their courses. So basically, this would be an interesting approach that we're looking into, you're seeing that you're not going to make it. The chatbot is aware that you haven't handed it in, so you have the possibility to say, okay, yes, I need help, and then we can track this and put it further on. So open source is awesome. Open source is free, but whatever you gain, you gain. That means you gain the pluses as well as the minuses. So whenever you have a problem with your open source stuff, then you have to deal with it yourself. That's usually a disadvantage of using open source. So that's why we really realized it makes sense to offer commercial support for it. And the commercial support looks like this. So there's the open source, and it's not like some companies would do it that 10% of the whole software is open source and the rest is commercialized. The entire thing, as I introduced it now, as we use it on a daily basis, as Differ use it, is open source and available for free. So there is no catch to it. You can download it. It's available on Docker. It's optimized for Kubernetes. It runs on Google Cloud. It's partnership with Google Cloud, so they actually offer it themselves on their market. But of course, as a big company or even smaller company, if you build chatbots and you want to make sure whenever there's a problem, you actually can call someone or have someone who actually is able to help you with it, you would like to have support. Then, of course, just having the technology doesn't allow you yet to build a good chatbot. You also need the knowledge how to build a solid chatbot itself. And there is a REST API available, and you can use it, and it's very easy to use. But if you have multiple chatbots, 2, 5, 10, something like that, with a lot of shared knowledge, then it can get a bit confusing with the REST API itself. So that's why we developed an advanced configuration UI that makes it easier to handle it when you have multiple bots. If you just have one bot, if you just want to play with it, REST API is good enough. But for bigger scenarios, especially in enterprise context, we would suggest using the advanced configuration UI. And of course, messenger integrations. I mean, there are Messenger and XAMPP available for free, but other integrations such as Skype or other channel integrations would be part of the commercial support. I'm going to my last slide. We're going to make a hackathon for E.D.D.I, with E.D.D.I, about E.D.D.I, everything with E.D.D.I. So it's 1.5 days with mentors. The idea is you come there, you have an idea, and you build it with E.D.D.I. We provide credits on Google Cloud, so there is no cost involved. And you have the possibility to learn everything about E.D.D.I. Maybe come already with a use case that should solve your particular use case in your company. Maybe it is a startup, maybe an enterprise, and just see how it works and how easy it actually is to spin something up. So just this weather example, when I started thinking about let's make a weather example, until the part when I finished, took me 30 minutes from setting it up from scratch until it worked. So okay, yes, I'm a developer and I'm experienced with that stuff, but I'm pretty sure any of you guys it wouldn't take any longer than that. And amazingly, I only have 26, 25, 24 seconds left, but I'm done. Thank you very much.
So, there were a bunch of questions in Slido, and the good news is we have a solid 5 minutes to deal with them. So, please, the behavior looks, the groups look quite strict. What happens if I ask the same question again, or a totally different question?
Different approaches. So first of all, the groups or the rules itself, it's not a decision tree. That's very important. Very often, kind of rule applications are decision tree, and once you're stuck somewhere, you have to answer this. But E.D.D.I has been designed that you can always jump out. For instance, first you talk about the weather, and then all of a sudden you want to know how the chatbot is doing or anything else. So there will always be the flexibility that other rules can apply to and be executed.
So I guess if you'd coded a more complex example, we could have seen that.
Absolutely.
Clearly. All right. What NLP are you using?
Written own. And I would never recommend anyone writing their own NLP because it sucks. But I had to do it. I started 10 years ago. 10 years ago, there was nothing available, so I just had to start it and, yeah, made a lot of U-turns because it's really, really difficult to make one that really works well and is performant. But apparently, yes, after 10 years, we have something that works pretty good.
And does it support other languages?
It's more or less language independent, since we're translating into meanings or expressions. From that point on, you you deal with whatever it is. But I have to say we don't have much experience with languages other than Romanian. So basically all German, English, Spanish should work perfectly. Chinese, Japanese, those languages probably would need some adaptations to work as well.
What if I say, what's the weather in Vienna? How do you set it up so that it perhaps I don't have to know that?
Yeah, interesting. I was looking in the front. If somebody would actually catch that, that's a difference whether you ask first for the weather and then say Vienna, or you have it in 4 things. So I have to admit, in that example, this particular use case is not covered because it's more difficult. The way you would do it is you say what's the weather, and you find it as trigger current weather, and then you can apply another rule within the regular dictionary that says whatever comes afterwards is a city. That's one opportunity, or the second opportunity, you have a dictionary with all the cities available and just match it this way, and then it would work too. So yes, it's not covered in that particular example I just gave, but easily doable as well.
So, if I've already built my own chatbot, convince me now to redo it in E.D.I.
I wouldn't, because unless you're unsatisfied and looking for something else, I think never touch a running system. If you already have something that is satisfying you, then stick with it. Otherwise, the contrary, you're not satisfied, you're looking for something else, and then you have the possibility either go for one of the proprietary stuff that costs a shitload of money, or go with open source that actually has been proven and is there for quite a while.
All right, fantastic. I would go with open source. So if somebody hasn't written a chatbot and would like to, this is very much the path that you'd recommend.
It depends if you're tech savvy or not. So if JSON sounds like strange alien language to you, then I would say no. But if you're a developer or have used RESTful APIs and in general know the, like you can read the documentation and then you can actually do what the documentation says, then absolutely.
All right. And does it have any features related to context or pragmatics?
Yes, absolutely. There are various possibilities. So either you can actually feed context within E.D.I along what the user said. So that could be profiles such as what's the first name, what's the birthday, or whatever other kind of context you have. But it could be also between parsing and the output. There are plugins that actually call other services to fetch contact data, then that could be used. So there are various possibilities on fetching context or handing it over.
All right. Very last question. What are the constraints on where I can run E.D.I?
Well, where you can run Docker.
Okay. Which is pretty much everywhere.
I guess so.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.